So is the loophole here, or is it your assertion that these victims aren't credible, that the 302s maybe didn't produce credible statements that rise to a probable cause?
It's not my assertion, sir. It's the assertion of two different United States attorneys' offices from three separate administrations who investigated those same materials in lifetime.
Are the 302 documents in the FBI's possession?
They reviewed all that, yes, sir.
And so have you reviewed those 302 documents where the victims name the people who victimized them?
If I personally know, but the FBI has.
So how can you sit here and in front of the Senate and say there are no names?
I said
I named one today.
I said we are not in the practice at the Department of Justice FBI of releasing victims' names. That is not what we do. We are also not in the habit of releasing incredible information. That's not what we do. But multiple authorities have looked at the entirety of what we have.
Okay, I got to move on here. Were you present when the AG had the White House event when she released the binders to the social media influencers?
I was, yes.
So if you're willing to meet with social media influencers who stood to benefit from the sensational and sad stories of these victims, will you meet with the victims as well?
The FBI will meet.
47 seconds ago, in a packed House Judiciary Committee hearing room with 17 cameras focused on one man, FBI Director Kash Patel's hands began trembling as a congressman from Kentucky pulled out a folder marked classified and asked the one question that would destroy 8 months of carefully constructed lies. "Director Patel," the congressman said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You told the Senate yesterday there's no credible information that Epstein trafficked women to anyone else, but I'm holding FBI documents that name 20 men, 20, including a Hollywood producer worth hundreds of millions, a royal prince, 6 billionaires, and a high-profile government official, so I need you to explain something to me and to the American people watching right now." He paused, letting the tension build. How can you sit there and say there are no names when your own FBI agents documented 20 of them? The room went dead silent. That kind of heavy, thick silence where you can hear the air conditioning humming and cameras auto-focusing because everyone in that room understood what had just happened. The congressman from Kentucky hadn't just asked a question, he had dropped a bomb, and Kash Patel, the man who had spent his entire career building walls of bureaucratic language to hide behind, suddenly had nowhere to run. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. You could see him calculating, desperately searching for an escape route that didn't exist. The cameras captured everything. His left eye twitching almost imperceptibly, the way his breathing had become shallow and rapid, how his fingers pressed against the table's edge so hard his knuckles turned white. This wasn't the composed FBI director who'd walked into the room an hour earlier. This was a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Let me take you back to how we got here. House Judiciary Committee, January 23, 2025. What was supposed to be routine FBI oversight became the systematic destruction of one of the most powerful cover-ups in American history. Something was different the moment Kash Patel walked in. His usual confident stride was slower, his shoulders tense. His 3 lawyers kept their briefcases closed, ready to leave quickly. They knew something was coming. The first hour proceeded exactly as scripted. Republican members praised Patel's leadership, cited arrest statistics, commended his hardline stance on various issues. Democratic members pressed on controversial topics, but Patel deflected each challenge with practiced precision. He had his talking points memorized, his legal shields perfectly positioned. Then the congressman from Kentucky got his 5 minutes. Now, you need to understand something about this congressman. He doesn't grandstand. When he asks questions, it's because he already has the answers. When he brings documents, those documents end careers. He opened that classified folder with deliberate slowness. Patel's eyes tracked to it immediately, and his composed mask slipped for a split second. "Director Patel," the congressman began, "I want to ask you about FBI document FD-302s from the 2019 investigation." Patel's left hand moved to adjust his tie. In body language analysis, that's called a self-soothing gesture. It indicates psychological stress. These are FBI interview documents with victims who cooperated in the Southern District of New York investigation. And according to these victims, the FBI, your FBI, documented detailed testimony about at least 20 men Jeffrey Epstein trafficked women to. He held up the first document so the cameras could see the official FBI letterhead. One Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, one royal prince, one high-profile individual in the music industry, one very prominent banker, one high-profile government official, one high-profile former politician, one owner of a car company in Italy, one rock star, one magician, at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada. With each name on the list, Patel seemed to sink a little deeper into his chair. His face, which had started the hearing with its usual bureaucratic confidence, was now visibly pale under the committee room lights. We know these people exist in the FBI files, the files that you control. I don't know exactly who they are, but the FBI does. Then came the kill shot. Have you launched any investigations into any of these people? And have you seen these 302 documents? This was the moment. 8 months of no credible information was about to collide with documented FBI evidence of 20 named perpetrators. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Patel's throat visibly tightened as he swallowed hard. Behind him, his lead attorney leaned forward slightly, but there was nothing he could do. No objection would save his client from this moment. The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade, and everyone in that room knew it was about to drop. When Patel finally spoke, his voice had lost its earlier authority. The confident baritone that had dominated previous hearings was now strained, almost hoarse. Patel tried to fall back on his usual bureaucratic shield. Sir, I have asked my FBI agents to review the entirety of the Epstein files and bring forth any credible information. And we're working with Congress not only to divulge that information and produce it to you, but any investigations that arise from any credible investigation will be brought forth. But the congressman wasn't having it. So is the loophole here your assertion that these victims aren't credible? That the 302s didn't produce credible statements that rise to probable cause? Patel tried to punt to previous administrations. It's not my assertion, sir. It's the assertion of 2 different United States attorneys' offices from 3 separate administrations who investigated those same materials. Are the 302 documents in the FBI's possession? Yes, sir. And so have you reviewed those 302 documents where the victims name the people who victimized them? Here's where it got interesting. Patel, for the first time in the hearing, showed genuine hesitation. Not personally, but the FBI has. So how can you sit here and in front of the Senate and say there are no names? The trap was perfect and inescapable. Patel had testified under oath that there was no credible information about trafficking to others. But now he was admitting the FBI possessed detailed victim testimony naming 20 specific individuals. He couldn't have it both ways. But what happened next was even more devastating. The congressman pulled out another document. Were you present when the Attorney General had the White House event when she released the binders to the social media influencers? Patel nodded. I was, yes. So, if you're willing to meet with social media influencers who stood to benefit from the sensational and sad stories of these victims, will you meet with the victims as well? The question hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Because that's what it was. A direct accusation that Patel would meet with social media personalities for photo ops, but wouldn't meet with the actual victims whose cases he was supposed to be investigating. Patel tried to deflect. The FBI will meet with anyone who has information. Will you personally meet with them? The FBI and the professionals who are handling the cases will. Translation: no, he wouldn't personally meet with the victims. The man running the FBI, who had time for social media influencers, didn't have time for the women Jeffrey Epstein trafficked. But the congressman wasn't finished. Not even close. Were you instructed that it was important to release the documents to the Oversight Committee on the day of my introduction of the discharge petition to release these files? Patel claimed he didn't know what day that was, but the congressman had done his homework. Well, they were released that day, and there were victims' names who weren't redacted because they were in such a rush, and the victims are not happy about that. This was devastating. Not only had Patel failed to investigate the 20 named perpetrators, but when pressured to release documents, his FBI had been so sloppy they'd exposed victims' names publicly. The same victims he claimed to be protecting by keeping everything classified. Then came the final blow. Have you investigated any of the CIA connections? Have you seen the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein? And if you wanted to see it, would they show it to you? Patel's response was telling. I can speak for the FBI, and that's presuming there's a CIA case file, and I've reviewed everything that the interagency, not I, the FBI, that was provided to us. Would you be willing to look at the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein? If there is such a file, and if it has not already been turned over to the FBI will look at any new investigative leads. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say there was no CIA file. He didn't deny its existence. He essentially admitted that if there was one, he hadn't seen it, and that the CIA might not have shared it with the FBI. This suggests something extraordinary, that there might be a separate CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein that the FBI director, the head of federal law enforcement, has never seen. The hearing continued for a few more minutes, but it didn't matter. The damage was complete. In 5 minutes, the congressman from Kentucky had systematically destroyed every defense Patel had constructed around the Epstein investigation. He'd proven that FBI documents exist naming 20 specific men who victims say participated in Epstein's trafficking operation. He'd shown that Patel had time for social media influencers but not for victims. He'd revealed that the FBI had been so careless with document releases that they'd exposed victims' names. And he'd suggested that there might be CIA files on Epstein that the FBI director had never seen. Within an hour, video clips were everywhere. FBI director admits to 20 names in Epstein files trended worldwide. Legal experts called it the most damning testimony they'd ever witnessed. But here's the critical question. Why would the FBI have detailed victim testimony naming 20 perpetrators but not investigate any of them? Why is victim testimony not credible when it's detailed enough for official FBI 302 forms? The answer is simple and terrifying. The 20 names are too powerful to investigate. The Hollywood producer, the royal prince, the 6 billionaires, the high-profile government official, they're all protected by a system that values power over justice. Kash Patel walked into that hearing room thinking he could maintain the cover-up with bureaucratic language and procedural deflections. He walked out knowing that 20 names documented in FBI files had just been exposed to the American people, even if the specific identities remain hidden. The congressman from Kentucky did something extraordinary in those 5 minutes. He didn't just ask tough questions, he methodically proved that the FBI possesses evidence of a massive criminal conspiracy and has chosen not to act on it. 20 names. 20 men who victims say participated in Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking operation. 20 perpetrators who remain free because their power protects them from investigation. And one FBI director who just admitted under oath that his bureau has chosen not to pursue justice for their victims. The files exist, the names are documented, the evidence is there. The only question now is whether anyone in power will have the courage to act on it. But here's what you can do right now. Share this video everywhere. Send it to everyone you know. Because the mainstream media won't tell this story the way it needs to be told. They won't dig into why 20 documented perpetrators remain free. They won't ask why the FBI director admitted under oath that he has evidence of a massive trafficking conspiracy, but chooses not to investigate it. The victims deserve justice. The 20 names deserve to be exposed. And Kash Patel deserves to answer for why he's protecting them instead of prosecuting them. This isn't about politics. This is about children who were trafficked and powerful men who bought their silence with influence and fear. The truth is in those files. The question is, will we demand it?